think of your body as 50% human, 50% microbiome. So that's a fundamental concept that's very important. And that 50%, you're going to acquire very important pieces of that 50% of the microbiome at birth. And so, one of the most significant single events in your life that'll determine the course of your life is what microbiome you acquire at birth. And I'll give you now an example. I don't want anyone to think that 50% microbiome is like a parasite or it's like a burden or it's like an enemy or something negative. This 50% of our body that's microbiome, these are our best friends. We have co evolved over millions of years to live with them and to depend on them for physical health, mental health, cognitive health, and immune health.
Welcome to the Immigrant Nation podcast. My name is Martin. I am your host, your brother. And my job here today is to help facilitate the conversation we're about to have. The conversation we're about to have is with none other but our guest, Dr. Momchilo Vuyisich. Momo, as many of his colleagues call him, is a Yugoslavian-born immigrant, a biochemist, and the co-founder of this beautiful company, Viome, a biotech company that uses cutting-edge technology, science that is personalized to your health, but his real story is real different. He beat chronic pain, challenged medical systems, and built a company rooted in the belief of healing starts within, inside of you. This episode is for immigrants fighting silently in body and in spirit. Momo, welcome to the show. I have a question for you. How can
Sure,
I,
thank you.
as an immigrant, change the world?
Great question. Love that topic. So, yeah, I think immigrants in general, it's a generalization, but I think immigrants in general have this sort of entrepreneurial spirit, lots of energy, lots of enthusiasm, and they're like cats. Wherever you throw them, they will land on their feet and they will just figure things out. And I think that there's the world has many problems, and if you start to go upstream of those problems and ask, is there one root cause of most of world's problems? Is there just one root cause? Because if you go upstream and find that root cause, and if you can fix the root cause, then all the downstream problems will get solved. And so instead of spending decades or centuries trying to fix these individual problems, why don't we figure out what is the root cause of all these different problems and then solve that? And that's what I think. I know what that is. And so today, I think in the human society, the number one root cause problem for majority of the societal problems is the system of governance. And that is the fact that we have this way of managing populations or countries by electing one person and trusting that one person for the next number of years to make the right decisions for the entire population. That's basically the concept. And if that person is a good person and they actually care about the people, care about the culture, care about the country, then they may, in fact, do well and the society may flourish. But if they are an egotistic, evil person, they can completely destroy that culture that may not recover for decades or centuries. And so we are basically counting on a system where one person makes decisions for the entire country. And we have, I'm just going to list a few examples where the few people ruin it for the entire country. And the examples I'd like to bring up is, for example, Hitler in the Second World War single-handedly not only destroyed tens of millions of people outside of Germany, but also internally in Germany, I don't know, 20 million people died. And then if you look at the Yugoslavian Civil War, where I grew up, the few politicians basically decided that harmonious life we lived did not suit their needs. They were not either making money out of it, or they did not have enough power, or for various egotistic reasons, they decided, okay, let's ruin this, and destroyed an entire country where since the early 90s, arguably the life for many people is worse than it was before. And then we have examples of Rwandan genocide and countless other examples even today, where one person or very few people can ruin an entire country. And that is, I think, a relevant topic also for immigrants because it basically forces people to move, leave their culture, leave their loved ones, leave the life that they know about and where they can really flourish, and makes them go to a new environment where they have to spend years or decades adjusting and trying to survive, right? And so what if we had a system of governance where one or a few individuals were simply not allowed, not enabled to make bad decisions for the country? What if we had that? And today, I think for the first time in history, we can have such a system.
Mhm.
And I really would like to encourage and inspire people to not just talk about it, not just have discussions, but to actually do it. And what I mean by doing it means someone needs to take charge and create a system, design a system that then can be tested on a small scale in a county or in a small country, fine tune it in that small scale with the help of the government that's progressive enough to say, hey, this is good for the people, let's make it work. And once it's optimized, then it can scale to larger countries. And eventually, people will want to vote for that kind of a system because it simply prevents individuals or very few individuals from declaring wars, from committing genocide, from committing, all kinds of crimes against their own people just for their own benefit. And so that's sort of the concept. And I've been thinking about this for 30 years since I was essentially forced to leave my home country. And so I have lots and lots of thoughts about this, but I think that's maybe just a primer. And maybe if we have time at the end, we can touch a little bit about some examples and just expand a little bit. But I'm sure you're curious about other topics of
Oh,
discussion.
listen, I am the guy who follows a conversation, and I definitely am not gonna deviate to go a different direction because I like the direction we're going into, right?
Okay.
As an immigrant, I migrated from my country, Kenya, because of corruption. And then many years later, when I have really understood how the system and the culture of American business and government works, I discovered that corruption is also rooted in almost everything that is going on in America. So when you talk about testing a system that would allow me, because I have to revert to my question, which was my question was, how do I change the world as an immigrant? What is the system you're referencing?
Okay. All right. Let's dive deeper. So, this is what's in my mind. This is what's in my mind. What's in my mind is that today we can use the power of supercomputers and databases and data collection methods to where, let's say, we take a country or a county or any kind of a geographic area where 1 million people live. The system, the computer system that makes recommendations to a committee that will make decisions or that will make recommendations to the population that will directly vote for a decision, right? That computer system gathers the data about every single person in that country, about what kind of financial situation they're in, what kind of housing situation they're in, what kind of jobs they have, what kind of training they have, what is their age, what is their health status, all of those things, all kinds of data, and that'll crystallize later as to what data is all important and what data needs to be collected. And then you say, okay, we want to build a rail system, and that rail system is going to go from point A to point B, and it's going to cost $10 billion, right? And the government needs to make a decision as to whether we should invest $10 billion into that rail system or not. The computer system will now be able to compute what is the benefit for the population and what is the detriment for the population, right? Who is paying for this not only to build it, but to maintain it? And then who's actually benefiting from it, right? Because as you can imagine, in any geographic area, if you're building a rail station from point A to point B, you're not going to benefit the entire population. It's going to be a very narrow portion of the population. And so it depends on the population distribution, because if 90% of the population lives around point A and point B, that's very different from if you have a very distributed population and only 10% of the people live in that point A and point B, right? So those are the kinds of population density. And then you're going to look at the patterns of where the jobs are, where the residential areas are, where the daily movement patterns are, where the traffic is, the cost of building and operating this railway, the cost of current, not only transportation but environmental impact of the cars and so on. So you're going to get all those data, and then you're going to compute, basically literally mathematically compute and say, okay, if we build this station, it's going to cost this much money, and Joe Schmo out in the country is not going to benefit at all, and they're going to end up paying this much money per year for that rail station to be built and this much money per year for it to be maintained, right? So that's a detriment for Joe, because Joe is never going to use that railway station,
Yeah.
right? But the benefits are that we're going to reduce traffic, we're going to reduce pollution, we're going to reduce the use of natural resources. And so when we actually start the railway station, we're actually going to benefit as a country as a whole, because we're going to be using less fuel, we're going to have less pollution, we're going to have to do less of this and that. And so you're going to take all these data in, and you're going to basically compute the benefit and the detriment to the population. And now that data will be displayed. And I have a kind of a specific way of displaying that data in my head, but there are going to be many visualization methods of doing that. And then you're going to say, okay, what other things can we do with that money, right? So, for example, what if you say, okay, that's going to cost this much money? We could actually, instead of funding the railway station, we could actually increase the salary of every teacher in the country by $10,000 a year, right? So you don't have to only make one choice. You can say, okay, how are we going to spend our money? There are these 10 choices, and they all have pluses and minuses. They all affect different portions of the populations differently. What should we do? And so the computers will simply, very objectively and just brutally mathematically compute all the benefits and detriments.
Dr. Momchel,
And
let
now
me jump in here because I'm banning with things inside of me. Thank you. So
okay.
while as a scientist, right, you have a scientific way of seeing the world,
Yes.
which really results, and correct me if I'm wrong, to a point where you can compute data and analyze data and see what results would be, because this is real, it's crunching numbers. But then in my world, in my experience, life is not about data only. There is culture. And in your scenario that you just painted, there is GDP, right? What type of GDP do we have in that particular location?
Yep.
There is also political will, right? Do you have a group of people that is willing to actually go through the change? And then there's those who are going to lose from the change. Okay, so how do
Yep.
we put all these people in the same pot and emerge as winners?
Yeah, so I mean that's a very challenging question to answer today. The what you need to do is you need to build a system, you need to optimize it, and then you need to take all these inputs into it, and you have to contextualize it. So given the exact same data in
Mhm,
Kenya and in
mhm.
France, you might make a different decision,
Absolutely.
right? It'll depend on the culture, on the society, on the land, on the religion, on everything. But the main point of this
Mhm.
is, independent of where it is, it will provide the entire population with very objective data as to how it's going to affect that population. And then not one person like the president is going to make the decision that's best for them, but a large committee that represents all parts of the country will make the decision based on those data. Or there will be a direct democracy where literally the people vote for it,
Here lies
right?
the problem.
Okay.
A majority of the people across the globe believe a government is there to solve their problem.
Yep.
I happen to live on the other side of the fence where I think the government is the problem.
Right.
So it puts me back to the same place where I was from the very beginning, right? You may have a willingness from the people, but you have an unwillingness from the government, because obviously there's forces here that are going to be losing.
Yeah, yeah,
Let's assume you have goodwill on both ends.
right.
Should immigrants be looking to become a problem? I mean, should immigrants be looking to become a solution by coming with ideas, as you're suggesting, outside of the system, or coming with ideas, as you're suggesting, inside of the system?
Yeah, I think that that depends on what country you're in. If you're in a country like Singapore, I think you can try to develop that system in
Mm-hmm.
Singapore, and Singapore government may be, maybe accepting that. Hey, we want to do something like that. And recently, the country of Albania incorporated some kind of an AI person who's supposed to be providing some kind of objective information, right? So you never know what country's government at that time might actually be accepting to this approach. But the point is, whether you're an immigrant in a country or not, it doesn't matter where you are. If you develop that system, you can then shop it around different countries and identify a country that may surprise you which one it is, or it can be a county. It doesn't have to be a whole country, right? Some geographic or political area can say, you know what, let's test this system. And once you test that, so this is going to go through phases. The first phase is test it in a small area,
Mm-hmm.
optimize it, and understand how different cultural, political, geographic aspects affect the function of the system, and then scale it from there carefully in other areas and understand how different factors affect it. And so, again, if you're going to implement that system in New York City versus in rural Kenya, it's going to be different. But the beautiful thing about mathematics is that you can just adjust these parameters and see what's the most optimal solution. And again, the system does not need to be tuned to make the decision. The system is simply, so for example, here's a parallel that I think is effective today, right? So today in modern medicine, someone has a tumor. The doctor can say, I have 6 different treatments for this tumor, and can say, I am going to guess as to what treatment is going to work best. And I'm going to guess based on my experience, right? That's it, based on my previous experience. But I know nothing about this person's tumor. I have no data, right? And that's basically completely blinded decision. Whereas with modern diagnostic tools, you can actually take a sample of the tumor, analyze it in a chemical lab, and then use mathematics to compute exactly what are the odds that each of the 6 treatments will work for that person's tumor. And now you provide the doctor the data. The computer doesn't make any decisions. The computer doesn't say you should do this or you must do this or else, right? The computer simply puts out a table that says here are the odds for each treatment working in this person, right? And the doctor knows not only what the odds are now that are computed, but knows the potential side effects. And so if the doctor looks at the table and says, okay, we have 2 treatments that have very similar good odds, I can choose one of those 2, but one of them has much higher potential side effects, then they're going to choose the one that has less potential side effects, right?
Mm-hmm.
If there's one really absolutely the best way, the computer says, based on my data, this is by far the best way to treat this patient. Even if that way can have potential side effects, the doctor may choose it because the patient is going to suffer some side effects, but they have the best chance of survival. So the human still makes the decision, but the computer just provides the data. And that's really where we are today. We have the computational infrastructure to generate such data where decisions can be made based on the data and not based on personal benefit to the politician or to some group of people that are lobbying the politician, or however the opinion is created of very few people, not based on the data. So that's really the concept.
If you're joining our conversation this morning, welcome to the Immigrant Pod. Wow. Wow. Momo, tell our listeners who you are before I jump to my next question.
Sure. So I'm a co-founder and chief science officer and head of clinical research at a company called Viome Life Sciences. Been a scientist all my life and spent about a decade in academia, about a decade in the government, and now about a decade at my company.
So, what you just did was you walked us through a process of how immigrants can start participating in solving society problems, healing society problems. How do we start healing our bodies?
All right, let's talk about that. Yeah, so I'll just give you a quick story about me and sort of what has inspired me to be where I am today and the path that I've taken. So in grad school, I developed some kind of an autoimmune condition that progressively became worse. And, in my younger age, for a few years, it just got progressively worse, and no doctor could diagnose it. It was simply an unknown autoimmune condition, and modern medicine couldn't figure out what was causing it. And the only thing they could do is try to inhibit my immune system, prevent my immune system from reacting, and suppress it, which is not a long-term solution because it has side effects, including death, and it's very expensive, and it doesn't really solve the problem. It just puts a band-aid on it. And I, as a scientist, rejected the idea that this was just bad luck, because today, anyone who gets hit by cancer or chronic disease, it's literally bad luck, which to me is unacceptable. um, and so I searched and searched and searched, and via a long journey of trying different kinds of diets, I figured out from reading the literature that it could be my condition could be caused by specific type of a molecule found in specific foods. And so the molecule is called NEU5GC. It's spelled
Mhm.
NEU5GC. And this is a whole long story, but basically it's an interesting molecule in that it it is made by all mammals except for Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens lost the ability to make that molecule about 2 million years ago while we were still in Africa. And we are basically the only mammal that doesn't make that molecule. But when we consume it from other mammalian foods, and so mammals are, animals that produce milk. So when we eat red meat or dairy, we consume that molecule and it gets incorporated into our body. In some cases, like mine, the immune system can react to that molecule and say, hey, this is not your molecule. This is a foreign object. I need to fight it. And so, what is the prevalence of this immune fight? I don't know. Hundreds of millions of people could be affected, or a few people could be affected. We don't know. We don't have the data. But I do know that when I spoke with the professor at University of California, San Diego, who discovered this mechanism, I met him because he completely changed my life. I completely cured myself. So once I stopped eating mammalian foods, it took a few months, but I completely healed myself. All my joints healed, all my soft tissues healed. I've had no symptoms now for more than a decade. And so after a few years, after I healed myself, I emailed him and I sought him out and I went to meet him in San Diego. And I was like, wow, you literally saved my life. Like you changed my life in a profound way. And he's like, yeah, I know. Lots of people have done that to me. They've come and told me the same thing. So he thinks it's a very common occurrence, but we don't know how common. And so that was one pivotal moment in my life, that realizing that 7 or 8 centuries ago, a third of the world's population died of Black Death, right? This was the Black Plague. And at that time, if you lived, it was good luck. If you died, it was bad luck. We had no clue as to what was causing it, how it was spread, how to treat it. We knew nothing, right? It was literally good luck, bad luck. Today, 8 centuries later, if you get cancer or multiple sclerosis or Alzheimer's disease, it's literally good luck, bad luck. We are literally 8 centuries behind when it comes to chronic diseases and cancers. And the only reason we are in this situation is because no one has figured out how to make money out of keeping people healthy. Everyone else has figured out how to make vast amounts of money out of keeping people sick, right? And so that's what modern medical system is, for the most part, is maintaining the disease and treating the person for the rest of their life and monetizing on that. That's the system. And that doesn't mean that people set it up in an intentional way to be that way. It doesn't mean that, pharma companies are evil. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that investors are evil. None of that is true. It's just a system in the society where you can invest money and get more money out of it, and people want to do that, right? That's how it is. That's the vehicle. There isn't a system where people can put money into preventive medicine and make money out of it because of many complicated stories, and we can dig into some of those. Um, but that's what the system is like today. So we just need to realize what the system is like. And I understood, 15 years ago that the system is like that. And then my background in systems biology, biochemistry, molecular biology, all of that stuff, genetics, allowed me to basically figure out, okay, here's the thing. There are hundreds of thousands of people in the world who are in their 90s and they're healthy.
Yes.
They're physically healthy, mentally healthy, cognitively healthy, and immunologically healthy. So nature has already figured out a way to keep humans healthy for 90 years. It's all natural. These people do not consume any kind of chemicals or pharmaceuticals or antibiotics. They don't go to see the doctors, nothing. They just live a natural life, one with nature. So nature's already figured this out. So the concept is you do not need to introduce artificial treatments in order to keep people healthy for a long time. All you have to do is figure out how nature has done it. That's it. And that's literally the concept behind my shift in my scientific career about 15 years ago, where the following 6 years I spent as a government scientist developing the technology that allows us to measure how nature works, and then over the last 9 years implementing that in a company where we not only measure for every person how their body's functioning, but identifying what is physiologically not in balance and how to fix it.
Dr. Montello,
And so that's really the concept. Yeah.
when I introduced this episode, I introduced it and asked our listeners to really key into what our conversation was going to be like, because some of the things I believed you would bring out here would change our lives. You've already done that, but I want you to zero down on your personal life, right? You did reverse orbit arthritis. This is an ailment that is affecting millions of immigrants across the globe. What role did your gut play? Tell us how you did this and what Viome can do to help the immigrant population.
Okay. All right. Let's separate those two stories. Those are two separate stories. So the way that I solved my own health issue is as a scientist, I read all the literature and I experimented on myself. And that process took many years. And so I would read. So what I was looking for in the scientific literature was chronic systemic inflammation, low grade inflammation, because that's what I had. My joints were inflamed, my soft tissues were inflamed, and they were basically, I was dissolving myself. And so my immune system was dissolving my body. And so that those are the search terms I was searching, and I was literally reading every single scientific paper published on that
Mhm.
topic. And when a paper would come out back in 2001, 2002, 2003, every year a paper would come out, or two or three papers that I would read, they would trigger an idea in my head, okay, maybe this is what it is. And I would try to adjust my nutrition or lifestyle. So I tried every diet that you can possibly imagine. I tried them all. And so unfortunately, I hadn't tried the no mammalian diet because those diets still don't exist. Like even more than a decade after I switched to this diet, there is no diet that's called mammal-free diet. That doesn't exist,
Mhm.
unfortunately. But anyways, so this was all well before Viome, before gut microbiome or anything like that. The field of gut microbiome at that time was in infancy. It was just sort of mentioned. Anyways, so I tried different things, and one of those things, just after a few years of trying, just nailed it. Meaning, I found a scientific paper that looked at what are the causes of chronic systemic inflammation, low grade in humans, and found this paper. And this paper mechanistically showed how it's done. It showed exactly the source of that molecule that causes that inflammation. I knew exactly what foods that molecule was in. I removed 100% of those foods from my diet, and a month later, I felt better. 2 months later, I felt definitely better. And I thought, okay, this is it. It took about a year to heal fully because my right hip was starting to lock up. But that's that story. until that point in time, there was no microbiome, there was nothing. It was just that,
Mm.
right? But that triggered me to sort of that whole process triggered me to think about, people living healthy without medications, to think about what are the parts of our nutritional lifestyle that make the difference in life. Because up until about 2010, everyone thought that genetics was the key to our health, meaning if you have a genetic disorder, you're going to get the disease, and if you don't have it, you're not going to get the disease, and that's it. You can smoke, you can drink, you can eat anything you want, it doesn't matter,
Mm.
right? And that is a completely false statement. And now we have data from thousands of identical twins. These are genetically identical twins where one of them develops a disease and the other one doesn't, yet their genetics is the same. And we've now studied those, well, not we, but other scientists have studied them and published these data showing clearly that genetics plays a very minor role in chronic diseases and cancers. It's the nutrition and the environment that play a major role in whether we're going to get a chronic disease or cancer. And that's really the major idea in my head. Hey, there are these environmental factors that are determining whether we're going to be sick or healthy. Let's study them, and let's study how they impact our body, and let's personalize them, because that's another pillar that I rely on. Is that, you see, if you say I want to eat healthy, or your doctor tells you go eat healthy, and you're like, okay, so you go on Google and you say, okay, I want to eat healthy, what do I eat, right? I cannot find any food that doesn't have scientific publications that say this is good for you and that say this is bad for you. In some publications, coffee is good for you. In others, coffee is bad for you. In one, beef is good, bad. Then another, beef is bad. Eggs, the same. Fish, the same. This type of oil, that type of oil, that type of fat, this type of fat. It's like everything is either good or bad. Everything's going to kill you. And so, what happens to the vast majority of people, including scientists, is that they spend a month researching what a healthy diet is, and they say, I give up, because there is no such thing as a healthy diet. And the reason for that is that the entire body, or most of the scientific literature in nutritional sciences, is based on a wrong question. That wrong question is coffee good for all humans, or is coffee bad for all humans? That's the question. And the question is the wrong question, because coffee is really good for some humans and really bad for others. The same with eggs, the same with beef. For some people, beef may be very nutritious and very healthy. For me, it'll make me sick and dissolve my body. And so we cannot ask the question, is beef good for all humans or bad for all humans? Because there is no answer to that question. And so those are sort of the pillars of what made me switch my scientific career in 2010 completely, and start this journey that's now lasted 15 years, which is, okay, first question, what molecules do we need to measure in the human body and in what sample types? And so we narrowed it down to saliva, stool, and blood. So today, Viome customers collect stool, blood, and saliva. Those three are easy to collect. You don't need any biopsy, you don't need any surgery, you don't need any doctor's visit. You just collect those three samples at home, anywhere in the world. We quantify more than 10,000 different molecules in those samples, and we identify all imbalances that we can in those three samples. And then our computers basically decide how to correct those imbalances with nutrition. And unless you have a question right now, I can walk through one example.
Walk us through the example before I jump to the question.
Okay, so let's talk about this. This is like really abstract. Like, we measure these molecules in the human body, and then we figure out what the imbalance is, and then we control it, and then we modulate it, right? How does that work? Okay, so let's go for an example that most people are familiar with. How does one make beer? In order to make beer, which beer is basically, let's narrow down beer to ethanol or alcohol, right? You're making alcohol. Okay, how do you make alcohol? You need two very important ingredients. They're both necessary and sufficient. One is you need a yeast that makes alcohol, and that's called brewer's yeast, or scientifically Saccharomyces cerevisiae. And you need to feed that yeast a specific food, which in this case is barley. So if you feed specific kind of a microorganism called brewer's yeast a specific type of food called barley, it will make you ethanol. And the more barley you give it, the more ethanol it'll make. The less barley you give it, the less ethanol it'll make.
Yeah.
Pretty simple. If you give that yeast lettuce, it will absolutely not make you ethanol. You cannot make beer out of lettuce. Okay, um, if you so you have to give it barley, and you have to give it to the right microorganism. So let's pretend for a second that ethanol is what we call a metabolite. So a generic term for any molecule in the human body is a metabolite. You can also call it a chemical or a compound, but let's stick with the term metabolite. So if from our data we determine that that metabolite is has an optimal range, meaning when there is some amount of it, it's very healthy for your physiology. If there's less of that, that's not good. You don't have enough of it. But if there's too much of it, then it's not good for you either. So the only time that that molecule is balanced, or that metabolite is balanced, when you have the right amount. So let's call it 6% ethanol is the perfect healthy amount. Okay. So let's say you're making beer, you put a batch in, and you let the yeast work, and you measure the amount of ethanol, and you say, oh, it's only 3%, that's too low, I want 6%. What are you going to do? You're going to add more barley, right? And yeast is going to go up and make 6% ethanol. Or you start a batch, and now you say, oh wow, the yeast is making ethanol so fast, it's already at 6%, and it's making it more. What are you going to do? You're going to withdraw barley. You're going to take away the food, and you're going to deprive that yeast of the food that it needs to make ethanol, right? So that's how you adjust the concentration of these metabolites. Okay, so now in the human body, how does that work? Well, we don't have just that yeast in our body. We have more than 1,000 different microorganisms, and each one of those microorganisms can make hundreds of metabolites. So we are talking about tens of thousands of chemical reactions occurring both by microbes and by our own cells. And these chemical reactions are mostly fueled by nutrients that we bring in. And what I would like the audience to understand is that when we think of food, we think of what our eyes see. So when we think of corn or potatoes or broccoli, we're thinking what our eyes are seeing. But what is broccoli? Broccoli is a sack of hundreds of molecules that feed our own body either directly or via our microbiome. And that's how I would like everyone to think of every food that you see with your eyes is actually consists of hundreds of additional foods that are feeding your body that you do not see with your eyes. You have to do a chemical analysis in order to understand that. And so now, let's now go to an actual example in an actual human being with actual metabolites. So the metabolite we're going to discuss now is called hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide is a gas, and it smells horribly, okay? But actually, it's essential for a healthy gut motility. So this hydrogen sulfide gas is produced by bacteria in the colon, and it's essential for us to actually move poop through our intestines, okay? Gut motility. And so our microbes need to produce some of it, but not too much of it. If we produce too little of it, we have constipation. If we produce too much of it, we have diarrhea. We don't want either one of those two. We want normal stool, right? So now, if someone has the right amount, of hydrogen sulfide, then the computer is not going to change their recommendations for the sulfur-containing foods. But if someone's microbiome is producing too little, the computer is going to know that from the measurement in the lab and say, you need to eat more of these foods that are going to feed your microbiome to produce more hydrogen sulfide so that you're no longer constipated. In other people where we measure too much hydrogen sulfide production, the computer is going to say, you have too much. Here are the foods that are fueling that production. We need to remove those foods from your diet, just like we were adding and removing barley for yeast. Is that too complicated, or is
No,
that pretty clear?
at least for me, I understand that very well. You know,
Okay.
and you're just speaking, I'm trying to keep two ideas together, right? And the two ideas you talked about, how as an immigrant, I may want to change my world, and the perception of it, right? It's not just changing the inside of me, but it's also changing of what is happening around me, right? And so based on, because everything we've talked about so far is falling down, is backing off of one central idea, right? That we need data to be able to make the right decisions, not just for our physical body, but also for the physical environment around us.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, so where do we find the willingness to make these changes, personal and
Yeah.
outside of the persona?
Yeah, I think that people depend on seeing actual data where it works. And so in the health area, we're talking about clinical trials and efficacy data, right? And so if you run a clinical trial and you show that this approach works, then people are going to believe more. In other cases, many people who are not scientifically educated, they may believe more in terms of stories, meaning their neighbor, their friend, their family member says, "Hey, I did this and it worked for me. It was wonderful. It changed my life." And they may be more now, more inclined to try it. And the more of that happens, it just exponentially grows, basically. So it's really, you have to prove that the data that you're generating are relevant. So, for example, the first decade of the century, we generated massive amount of genetic data where the promise was, maybe the audience is not familiar, but we sequenced the first human genome in early 2000s,
Mhm.
right? And the promise of the human genome project was that once we sequence the human genome, we will unlock the mysteries of all chronic diseases and cancers, and we will eradicate them. That was the promise. And at that point in time, in the late 80s and early 90s, that promise was scientifically sound. We didn't know about the microbiome. We didn't know about all these things. And so we thought, okay, it's the genetics. Well, in the first 10 years of the 21st century, after the genome was sequenced, we sequenced, many people and tried to figure out how genetics caused chronic disease and cancers, and we couldn't. And so we spent 10 years and still spending time and money trying to do that, and we realized, okay, that's the wrong data. That data is wrong. It doesn't actually, it's not relevant to human health. And that's why in 2010 I veered away from genetics. I was a geneticist at that
Mhm.
time, but I veered away from genetics, realizing this is not relevant to human health. Let me go figure out what is relevant to human health. So now at Viome, at my company, we're measuring a molecule called RNA, which is relevant to human health. And now we can prove that it's relevant because when we measure it and when we implement these nutritional strategies, we actually have done randomized controlled trials showing that it actually works.
What's RNA?
And so these are, yeah, I didn't think we were going to get to that level of detail.
Well, I do
Okay.
not want my listeners to miss it. Okay, so let's get to the detail.
Okay. All right. So when we talk about DNA, DNA is a physical molecule that doesn't have any function. It doesn't do anything. It's literally a physical object in space in every cell, and it's a set of instructions that say, "Here's who you could be as a human," and it gives instructions for every single cell in the body to do certain things like become a kidney, become brain, become the liver, and so on. But the only way to realize those functions is via RNA. So if you look at a gene, which is a very, very tiny portion of the entire genome. So when we talk about DNA, we think of the entire genome, 6 billion base pairs. A gene is a very small portion of that genome that encodes a certain function, but that function is carried out by copying that gene into RNA. So that's the first step of the process, going to RNA and then going to make a protein that actually performs the function. So let's talk about this for a second. Every cell in your body has the exact same DNA. And so if I sequence the DNA of your liver, your kidneys, and your brain, it'll just be the same, but it will not be able to distinguish whether it came from kidney, brain, or liver. It cannot, because it has the potential to be any of those tissues, any of those
Right.
organs. If we sequence RNA from your kidneys, liver, and brain, it's going to be completely different because the functions of liver, kidney, and brain are completely different. So the out of 22,000 genes that our DNA has, a few thousand genes are expressed in or turned on in the kidneys, and then different genes are turned on in liver, and then different genes are turned on in the brain. And those are the genes that are functional, that are actually determining what the function is. So that's one important feature that people should understand. The second important feature is, if we sequence the liver of a person when they have a healthy liver, and then sequence the DNA of the liver when they have a fatty liver disease, we will get the exact same sequence back. The DNA hasn't changed, meaning that same DNA encodes for healthy liver and encodes for a fatty liver that's dysfunctional. So DNA cannot even distinguish between healthy state and a diseased state. But if we sequence the liver, the RNA of the liver when it's healthy versus when it's fatty liver, it's very different, black and white different. The same thing with intestines. If a person has IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, when their intestine is healthy versus when they have an IBD flare, the RNA is very different. The DNA is exactly the same. So the concept here is that RNA is a dynamic molecule that not only tells you the function of a system, but it tells you how it's changing over time from healthy to unhealthy. And very importantly, not only is it telling you when it's changing from unhealthy to healthy, healthy to unhealthy, but it's giving you ideas of how you can modulate it, how you can reverse it back to healthy. And that's the whole concept of Viome, is that not only do we detect imbalances in human physiology, but we tell every user for every single imbalance that we find, we tell them how to reverse it back to healthy. And that's really the most powerful concept, because if someone tells you you have fatty liver disease, that's not very helpful unless you can tell me how to reverse it. Telling me that I'm sick, or telling someone with IBD that they have an IBD flare, that's completely useless, because that person already knows that they have an IBD flare. They're in pain and they have 20 diarrheas per day. So what they really need to know is, how do I reverse this thing back to healthy? And that's how we created this whole platform at Viome.
So it's really interesting. You're talking about reversing your health. You're obviously an evidence of what you have been studying over the years. Will the same principle apply when it comes to society? Can we reverse the way things are done to be able to change society?
Absolutely, we can with the data. I already gave an example earlier. The government proposes to, or someone in the society proposes to build a railway system, and then the computer says, okay, here's how much it's going to cost. Here's how many people are going to benefit. Here's how the society is going to benefit. Here's how much people are going to have to pay for it. And here are other ways that you can use that money. And the other ways are, okay, you can pay your teachers more money, or you can build more hospitals, or you can build more senior centers, or you can build more tourist facilities that are going to bring more money, which is then 5 years later going to give you money, free money, to build a railway system, right? So those are all kinds of things that computers today already have the ability to say, okay, you want to do this, here are the consequences of building that, here's the cost, here's the benefit, and here are the options. And then either some kind of a elected committee of many people, hundreds of people, or direct democracy, people vote for it, decide, okay, we're going to build that railway system right now because it is so beneficial for our entire community overall, and it's not really detrimental to anyone, right? Or we can, or the society
Hmm.
can choose, you know what, let's not build that right now. Let's take that money, put half of it into teachers salaries, and put half of it into building resorts, and in 5 years those resorts are going to be making us money that we can use to pay teachers more and to build a railway system. And that would be a very responsible long-term decision that is best for the society. And all of that can be made with data that we can gather today. And so why not?
So let's get into a little bit of your work, because I feel we need to talk about what you've been able to achieve, and the path you really are taking in life. If we can delve into our bodies a little bit, what is
Yep.
gut microbiome, and why should every immigrant listening care?
Okay, so think of your body as 50% human, 50% microbiome. So that's a fundamental concept that's very important. And that 50%, you're going to you're going to acquire very important pieces of that 50% of the microbiome at birth. And so one of the most significant single events in your life that'll determine the course of your life is what microbiome you acquire at birth. And I'll give you now an example. Actually, let's back up a little bit. So, this 50% human, 50% microbiome, I don't want anyone to think that 50% microbiome is like a parasite, or it's like a burden, or it's like an enemy, or something
Mm.
negative. This 50% of our body that's microbiome, these are our best friends. we have co-evolved over millions of years to live with them and to depend on them for physical health, mental health, cognitive health, and immune health. We depend on them. It's not, they're literally a part of us, and we have to we have to acquire them, we have to nourish them, we have to maintain them, we have to treat them well.
Mm.
Okay? So that's the concept. So what happens at birth? We are genetically evolved to produce breast milk. And that breast milk not only feeds the baby, but feeds the other 50% of the baby, which is the microbiome. So there is significant calories in breast milk that the baby cannot consume. It is incapable of consuming. They are specifically meant to feed specific microorganisms that are super healthy for the baby. And I will give you examples. The most well-known microorganism that the baby needs to acquire at birth is called Bifidobacterium longum strain infantis. Kind of long-term, long word. Some scientists have named it as its own species, which is called Bifidobacterium infantis. Luckily for us, we can actually buy this probiotic today. You can just go and buy it, which until about 2010 it wasn't available. So in early 2000s, the scientists at University of California, Davis, figured out that this was the key microorganism that determines whether a child is going to have a successful vaccination, meaning protective, or not. And then they dug deeper and found out, oh my gosh, this microorganism makes a difference in baby's development. And so they spun out a company and developed it. Now, there are many manufacturers that manufacture this probiotic, so you can buy it from multiple. But there's that original company that spun out of UC Davis. Okay, so this microorganism specifically has the metabolic capability to feed on these calories from human milk. They're called human milk oligosaccharides, or HMOs. And formula-fed babies over the last few decades have been deprived of these HMOs. But today, you can actually buy baby formula that has HMOs because we today recognize how important these HMOs are for babies' development. And so HMOs are produced by moms, put in milk to feed bifidobacteria. And these bifidobacteria make a whole bunch of metabolites. We earlier spoke about alcohol being a metabolite. We spoke about hydrogen sulfide being a metabolite. Now we're going to talk about another metabolite called butyrate. This molecule is super important for human health. It's like one of the most important molecules for human health. And so there are many ways in which butyrate is super important for babies' development, but I'll just highlight a couple. First, butyrate is an acid, so it creates an acidic environment in the gut, and that prevents pathogens from settling in and causing problems. So that's one very important aspect. The next important aspect, it's a signaling molecule. So it's a chemical signal that tells the immune system to remember an infection. And so I think that most people understand that our immune system has memory capacity, meaning that if you get sick from something, or if you get a vaccine for something, then your immune system can remember that infection so that when you encounter that pathogen again, it will remember it and kill it before it makes you sick. I think most people understand that. What the vast majority of people, including scientists, don't understand is that the chemical signal to develop the memory comes from microorganisms in the gut, and it's this molecule butyrate. So after vaccination or after exposure to a pathogen, over the next few days and weeks, the immune cells that fought that pathogen will die off, and you will lose the memory of that pathogen or that vaccine, unless at that time your microbiome is producing butyrate. It signals those cells, do not die, convert yourself to memory cells. And now those cells are going to be staying in our body for decades, and every time we're exposed to that pathogen, they're there and they're going to protect us. But they require this signal, this chemical signal, that we as humans do not produce and we as humans cannot consume. It has to be produced by the microbiome. So these are just two of many super healthy aspects of this Bifidobacterium infantis that is essential for child development, that we now understand, that 20 years ago we didn't understand. And then as we age, we are acquiring more and more microorganisms, but that birth is really the single most important step. Because let's talk about birth, because I think that this is an important topic. Um, Naturally, the way that microorganisms are transferred from the mom to the baby are, there's no antibiotics, there's no toilet paper, there's no bath. Moms used to deliver the baby with poop on their anus, first of all, and second of all, as the baby is coming down to be delivered, it's actually squeezing poop from mom's intestines. So natural birth actually often leads to defecation. And that is a natural process that transfers the stool from the mom to the baby. And that is an important process because many of these microorganisms are called anaerobes. What that means is that they cannot live or survive in oxygen. And we have oxygen in the atmosphere, right? So, in other words, if you don't acquire those microorganisms at birth, you're unlikely to acquire them later via food or via probiotics or via other things. Things are changing right now, and we're starting, like, there is already one anaerobic microorganism on the market that you can buy as a probiotic. So things are changing and technology is enabling that, but it's one microorganism, it's not hundreds. So the way to get hundreds of microorganisms that are essential for child development at birth is to have a natural birth. No antibiotics to kill bacteria, no, just natural, the way we evolved to give birth. Again, going back to my first observation, nature has figured out a way to keep us healthy for a long time, and we've disrupted that natural process. And where we disrupted, it starts with
let,
birth. We put,
let me jump in
yeah,
here because this is important. Really, you said nature has figured out a way to keep us alive and healthy, and we have disrupted that. And I agree with you totally. I have a question that I think is a big concern for a lot of immigrants. In today's society, and really most of us understand what the history of birth used to look like, and how children were given birth to, and the mortality rate and all that good stuff. And now moving forward in the 21st century, things are slightly different. In that, we have a lot of births that are not delivered naturally. And so if we're avoiding to deliver our babies, our children, the natural way, and we're defaulting to cesarean, which is a lot of women in today's world that are giving birth that way, what are we depriving our children, and how do we compensate for that?
yeah, well, we're depriving the children this healthy microbiome, and there are, publications on this now about these anaerobic microorganisms and these essential microorganisms that are needed for child development. And so we're learning a lot more. And like I said, there's already Bifidobacterium infantis is already available for purchase, and another essential probiotic called Akkermansia muciniphila is also available for purchase. And there are many companies that are developing other microorganisms as probiotics. Unfortunately, it's a very slow
Mhm.
process, but it is rolling.
Is,
And so I would say,
is there a bridge or makeup for parents who have, or for children who've already gotten to a certain age? They're 12, they're 13, they're 14. They're after the science has really developed in the last several years. Is there something to bridge for these children? Because there's
yeah,
so much in the scientific world today that is related to um, children that were born to cesarean. And I've noticed this question coming
yeah,
from doctors when you go to the doctor's office. There's that, it's almost like a survey that they give you to answer. And one of the questions is, was your child delivered via natural birth or cesarean? Why that
yeah.
question, and what is in the marketplace to bridge the gap?
Yeah. Well, so the question is there because children with cesarean section birth have a much higher likelihood of missing out on these essential microbes that enable a healthy physiology. And so that's really, but I don't want to, I want to make sure that the audience understands it's not black and
Okay.
white. It's not like if you were born via cesarean that you definitely do not have the beneficial microbes. And it's not that if you were born naturally that you definitely have them. That's not the
Mhm.
case. It's just the odds are if you were born naturally, you are more likely to have those, and with cesarean, less likely to have those. But the only way to know is to do a gut microbiome test. So do a credible microbiome test, and it will tell you whether you have Akkermansia, whether you have Bifidobacterium longum, whether you have all these other microorganisms. That way, again, data. Let's get data. Let's not guess. Now, what if you do a gut microbiome test and it turns out that you have a very poor microbiome in that you don't have a lot of species in it, or you may not have essential species? There are several lifestyle and nutritional choices you can make that can boost your microbiome towards healthy in a very generic way, even if you don't go the Viome route. The Viome route is very personalized. Like our tests are going to detect exactly what you're missing and provide those to you, not only in the gut microbiome, but oral microbiome. And if we have time to touch upon the importance of oral microbiome, we can do that as
Mhm.
well. So, what are the generic ways you can do? What can you do? Well, first, there's a bunch of fermented foods. They are either fermented vegetables or fermented dairy. So we're talking about all kinds of yogurts, all kinds of cheeses, and then all kinds of fermented vegetables. Go to an Asian food store and grab all those fermented vegetables. Japanese and Korean stores may have 20, 30 different kinds of vegetables. And if you're lucky enough to live in a city where they have a farmer's market with those home fermented foods, just grab them all and eat them. You can also make homemade sauerkraut very easily. It's like the most simplest thing you can do. It's you just go to YouTube, watch a video, and see how you can make homemade sauerkraut. So fermented foods, Asian foods tend to be vegetables. European and Middle Eastern foods tend to be dairy. They're fermented, but the the fermenting microorganisms are similar and they produce similar metabolites that are super healthy for us. So eat those. The second is you can load up on probiotics. Now, probiotics is like a big world, and I'm going to just summarize here what I practice and what my family practices and what I recommend to friends, which is you can either go with Viome, which is you only get the probiotics you need and none you don't, or you can go to the store and buy a whole bunch, or you can do both. But I recommend daily probiotic consumption. But very, very, very importantly, those probiotics, in order to survive, they need food. So going back to my yeast or brewer's yeast, if you don't feed that yeast barley, it's going to die. You have to feed it barley, right? And so the food for microbes is generally called prebiotics or fibers, generally, but there are many other kinds. But basically, if you're trying to enrich your microbiome, you have to be eating a whole bunch of plant-based food, and because those are the foods that contain prebiotics and fibers and also antioxidants that microbes live off of. And so you want to eat plenty of plants. I tell people you should be eating more than 15 different kinds of plants per week. So these are fruits and vegetables, and minimize very starchy vegetables. You don't need to eat a lot of rice and potatoes and pasta. What I'm talking about is root vegetables like beets and um, carrots. What I'm talking about is leafy greens. I'm talking about all kinds of legumes. So green beans, peas, lentils, chickpeas, tofu, and soybeans. All of those are loaded with fibers, right? Um, and then cruciferous vegetables. So your cabbages, your Brussels sprouts, your broccoli, cauliflower, all of those, and then add some colors, add some bell peppers, tomatoes, cucumbers. So, and then onions, don't forget onions. Onions and garlic have fantastic foods for microbiome. Fantastic. They're directly feeding. And guess what? As we were evolving, people didn't have peelers, they didn't have running water. They would literally dig up an onion from the ground, shake off the soil, and eat it like an apple. They would eat the soil that's coating the onion. They would eat the entire onion. That was our food. That's how humans evolved. We didn't evolve to go to a grocery store. And so if one major way that I've enriched, so I lost a lot of the microbiome. I used to work in Africa, so I was essentially on doxycycline for 3 years to as a prophylactic against malaria. I used to work in Kenya and Uganda, and so I diminished my microbiome over those 3 years. And so I started gardening. I did organic gardening, and I would eat soil. Literally, I would pull a carrot out of the soil, just brush off the major soil, and then I would eat the carrot many, 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 many times. So these are the kinds of things that we have evolved with. And those people that I mentioned earlier that live well into their 90s, they don't wash their hands with Purell 20 times a day. They don't live in a sterile environment. Their hands are dirty, their nails are filled with dirt, they eat with their hands. They're one with nature. And that's how we evolved a healthy relationship with nature. And today, everyone is afraid of pathogens, and so we just sterilize and kill everything. Everything is kills 99.9% of the germs. That's like, and every food is sterile and everything is dead. But that's not normal. We've interrupted that interaction with nature.
I feel like this is like the best time for me to ask what's oral microbiome, but
Okay.
I want you to hold that thought. And when we're coming back on the oral microbiome, can you relate it with the mammalian diets? Um, and let's go for it. Let's go for that.
Yeah. Um, I am not aware of any involvement of the oral microbiome with mammalian
Okay.
diets. Mammalian diet that I avoid goes directly into my body. There are literature references showing that there are microbiome members that can digest this new 5GC
Hmm.
molecule and get rid of it before it's absorbed. I have not explored that personally, simply because if I avoid all mammalian foods, I'm healthy.
Yes.
And I'm not going to test. I tested on 3 occasions ingesting very small amounts of mammalian foods, and they made me sick for a month. And I'm not going to experiment on myself anymore.
Okay. All right. Let's jump on the oral
Either
microbiome.
I don't have those microbes.
Mhm.
Go ahead.
Go ahead and jump on that oral microbiome.
Yeah, exactly. So oral microbiome. So oral microbiome simply means microorganisms that live in our
Mhm.
mouth. That's what it means. And we have respiratory microbiome, which is also very important. We have vaginal microbiome, that's very important for women and preterm birth and all of that. But let's focus on the oral microbiome. So about 400 to 500 species of microbes on average live in our mouth. And they do things that are very helpful to us, but they can also be very harmful to us. So the vast majority of them are protecting us, and some of them are performing essential functions for our body. So let's dive into one example. As we age, we lose the ability to control our blood pressure. And so by the time we reach the age of 50, we lose 50% control of our blood pressure, which means that if you just rely on your own human body, you're going to have a high blood pressure by the time you're 50. What helps complement that 50% is the oral microbiome. And I'm going to say it very quickly how this works, but basically, there are molecules in foods called nitrates, and beets are the best source, but there are many other sources. These nitrates are used by oral microbiome as energy source, and they're converted into metabolites called nitrites. And our body makes nitrous oxide from nitrites, and nitrous oxides lowers blood pressure. So, a key component in lowering our blood pressure or maintaining it low is this chemical conversion, specifically by oral microbiome, of nitrates to
Mhm.
nitrites. If we have killed our oral microbiome either by using a mouthwash or by taking antibiotics or by consuming foods that have preservatives, we no longer have that function. We've lost that ability.
So pause here, please. Right. Here's my routine. Every night I eat my dinner, rinse my mouth, go to the bathroom, brush my teeth. I'm assuming every adult human being does the same thing. And when I brush my teeth, I will take a mouthwash and rinse out with water, then go to sleep. What just happened to my mouth?
Yeah, you're killing your healthy microbes. And so you can find a literature reference that shows that when you treat a mouth with for 7 days with this mouthwash, you increase your blood pressure.
Holy smokes.
You can find there's plenty of literature on that. Okay, but wait a second, that's not even the worst part. One of the worst parts, so this is the so we just discussed a very beneficial function of the oral microbiome. It's essential as we age to maintain a healthy oral microbiome so that we can maintain blood pressure, because high blood pressure is a risk factor for a whole bunch of chronic diseases, a whole bunch, including cardiovascular disease, which is the number one killer in the world, right?
Mhm.
So that's a very serious benefit, that if you kill your oral microbiome, you're not going to get that benefit. So nourish your oral microbiome. Okay, let's talk about the potential bad things that oral microbiome can do. So there are members of the oral microbiome and a particular bacterium called Porphyromonas gingivalis. This bacterium, under certain circumstances, can produce toxins. And we can get into technical details, but these toxins can cause insulin resistance that can lead to diabetes, and they can go to the brain and cause
Mm.
Alzheimer's. And there's a very complex cascade, and it's sort of a very scientific and geeky process, but it's all published in the literature. So for those geeks, go read it. Go ask ChatGPT, and it'll explain exactly how Porphyromonas gingivalis is associated with both diabetes and how it's a risk factor for diabetes and Alzheimer's. And so the bottom line is that we are just starting to uncover how important oral microbiome, respiratory microbiome, gut microbiome, vaginal microbiome are important for our health. We're like scratching the surface and understanding how fundamental they are to our health. And what have we been doing over the last 50 years is we've been taking antibiotics for every cold, we've been using the mouthwash, we've been putting preservatives in foods that are killing it, we've been sterilizing everything in our lives. And so we've disrupted this natural symbiosis with these best friends of ours. We've basically been killing them off. And what do we get in return? We get this massive epidemic of chronic diseases and cancers that's unprecedented in humanity.
I was just having this conversation yesterday with my brother-in-law, and we asked each other the same question. Why is it that now, looking at Gen Zers, looking at people our age, 50s and below, why is it that there is a massive amount of people that are getting cancers, they're getting diabetes, and we just couldn't pin it to anything, and now you just freaking my
Boom,
curiosity, right?
boom.
So, sticking on what's happening in my mouth, or can we come to, 'cause first, as an entrepreneur, an immigrant entrepreneur, I'm just sitting here listening to you. I'm like, holy smokes, there's a huge opportunity here for immigrant entrepreneurs to find solutions and defeat the reasons as to why we get sick, partly, right? Um, but let's just focus on the month. What are some of the action steps that we can take, those of us who are in our 50s and below, that can change the path of us not starting to be susceptible to some of the diseases that we can expose ourselves to?
Yeah. The most important thing is you need to basically not kill your oral microbiome. That is the most important thing. And so one of the things that I see and hear a lot is people get sick and they get a fever and they go to a doctor. And the doctor brushes it off and says it's either a mild bacterial infection or it's a viral infection. And 20 years ago they would have just prescribed antibiotics and that's it. But today doctors are actually much better about not automatically prescribing antibiotics. But I now see and hear and read patients demanding antibiotics because they somehow say, well, if I have a viral infection, antibiotic is not going to do anything for me, but it's not going to do anything to me, so there's no harm.
Mm.
And if I have a bacterial infection, I'm going to kill it, and that's a good thing. And both of those cases are likely wrong. First of all, antibiotics are the most harmful thing to your oral microbiome and any microbiome in your body, the most harmful because they're directly killing the bacteria,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And second of all, the reason you have an infection, the main reason is that you have a weakness in your microbiome. It could also be a genetic weakness, but it's more likely that it's contributed to by a weak microbiome. And so sure, you take antibiotic today and you kill off the pathogen, but you've also weakened your microbiome, which means that now you have more susceptibility to the next infection, and the cycle just keeps going. And every single time that a person takes antibiotics increases the risk of chronic illness development. So this is a scientific fact studied in very large populations. People can read this information. This is not something that I came up with. Every single so antibiotics are a dose dependent risk factor for many chronic diseases, including mental health, cognitive health, physical health, immune health. Every time you take antibiotics, you're increasing the risk of developing a chronic disease in your future. So really, you should be very careful. For example, what I recommend to my, this is not a medical advice because I'm not a medical doctor, but what I say is, if someone has a strep throat, that can turn very quickly into a very dangerous infection.
Mhm.
That probably warrants antibiotics, right? But if you go to a doctor and they test for strep and you don't have it, they test for, whooping cough, and you don't have it, well, you may just have some generic, bacterial infection. It may not be necessary to take antibiotics, right? If you have a blood infection, of course you're going to take antibiotics. You're going to take really hard hitting antibiotics. So you just have to be data driven as much as possible and make rational choices instead of, I have a headache and a sinus infection, I'm just going to keep taking antibiotics. That is not a long term solution. So that's one biggest thing you can do is rationalize to the best of your ability taking antibiotics. The second is, antibiotics don't only come from pharmaceuticals, they come from foods. When you see a label on foods that says natural or all natural, what that means is that the meat was not treated with any chemicals after the animal was slaughtered. But until the animal was slaughtered, you could have pumped that animal with antibiotics all you wanted. You can still label that meat all natural. And so I just want to caution people that unless they're taking organic meats, that it's very likely that the meats contain a lot of antibiotics. And that is, if you just ask ChatGPT or Google, you know, where's the majority of antibiotic use in the world? It's 90% used in animals, not in humans. So our non-organic animal products are just absolutely loaded with antibiotics. And yes, it's not the same dose, and it's not like if you eat one steak, you're going to kill your microbiome. But you do want to live 80 years, and it's a cumulative process of diminishing your microbiome by eating these meats, right?
Mhm.
Next, I want to point out is these preservatives. So, preservatives that they put in foods to kill bacteria in order to prevent spoilage. The food industry has become very creative about how they sneak them in and how they call them. And so, for example, one of the most egregious examples that I like to give to people is, earlier I mentioned sauerkraut is a very healthy food for general population. It's not healthy necessarily for everyone. Some people may produce too much hydrogen sulfide gas from cabbage and may have diarrhea, so that's not good for those people. But in general, sauerkraut is good. So you go to the store and you buy sauerkraut and you're like, wow, I'm listening to Momo and I'm eating sauerkraut. But you have to be very, very careful because most sauerkraut, the way they do it is that they actually make it by fermenting it, but then they add preservatives that kill those microbes to stop the fermentation process because people don't like over fermented foods,
Mhm.
right? And so they'll say things like, you know, sauerkraut ingredients, and they'll say cabbage, microorganisms, salt, and sodium benzoate and potassium sorbate, and in parentheses, to preserve freshness. Do you like your food fresh? Everyone likes their food
Everybody
fresh,
does.
so that sounds good. But the reason they added them is to kill the microbes to stop the fermentation process.
Definitely.
So now you're consuming that sauerkraut thinking that you're introducing beneficial microbes into your body. But not only are you not introducing beneficial microbes to your body, you're actually killing your existing microbiome because you're adding these preservatives to your body. So it has the opposite effect. So you, as a consumer, have to be educated. If there's a chemical or any ingredient in the food that doesn't grow on trees or animals, you should not be consuming it. If it's TBHQ, if it's polysorbate, if it's blue 5, orange 6, yellow 5, whatever it is, those things don't grow on trees and they don't grow on animals. Do not eat foods. Vote with your wallet that you're not going to buy those foods. Demand foods that are natural. So those are some of many, many
Mhm.
examples. I'd like to caution people to not consume foods treated with glyphosate and other pesticides, like basically non-organic
Yeah.
foods that they're not going to peel. Like non-organic banana, I think is okay. Non-organic orange, I think is okay because you're going to peel them. Non-organic apple, pear is absolutely not okay in my books. Absolutely not okay. They're loaded with pesticides, and we can go down this story if you would like, but the highlight the punchline is pesticides have been tested on negative effects on human cells only. They have not been tested for their negative effects on the microbiome. And now that independent labs are testing them, it turns out that many, such as glyphosate, are actually negatively affecting. They're basically antibiotics, basically, when used chronically over a period of years. They're basically killing your microbiome. And that's another reason why we're depleting our microbiome. These are our best friends. We're killing them over time by consuming not organic foods that we don't peel, um, or yeah. So there are many of these things, but those are some of the major ones. And then obviously don't use an antiseptic mouthwash. That the purpose of that mouthwash is to kill
Yeah.
microorganisms. And sure, they may kill a few bad ones, but they're going to kill a whole bunch of good ones. Not good.
Oh my goodness. Um, I don't even know where to start. You've completely gotten me to a point where I am questioning my everyday routines. There's so much more.
You should. We should all really reset ourselves, go learn, go educate ourselves, and then really restart a new life. Literally restart a new life. Like how you eat. How and we didn't even talk about sleep, exercise, or Zen. We've just been talking about nutrition. But the four pillars of health in my mind include nutrition, exercise, sleep, and Zen. And all of those contribute to health. And you got to reset your life and focus on four pillars of health every single day. So there's much more to the story. But look, all of this can be fun, can be educational, can be sort of like playing a game. You're just understanding the rules of the
Yeah,
game. And the benefit is that when you're 60 plus, you're going to be super healthy and you're going to enjoy every day and you're going to be very grateful for what you've done for your body over the previous decades. So why not invest in your body? That's the best investment you can make.
absolutely. Absolutely. So we're getting to the top of the hour. We're halfway of where I thought our conversation was going to go. Um, I want to kindly request that we do this again because I would say we're just
Okay?
getting to the end of part one, and I have a feeling that there's so much more that you want to upload, and it's like okay, I can't crunch it all together. That's okay.
Well,
Now, can we plan on doing this a second so that we have a part two? Because you're just getting
yeah,
to the part of where it gets really sweet.
well, we can do that and we can be data driven.
Absolutely.
As you know, I'm a scientist and I like data. So, how about
Yeah.
this? Yes, of course, I'm willing to come back, but how about this? You look at the viewership of this podcast
Mhm.
and see if this is, and comments and feedback, and see is this what people are interested in? Because why would we record another podcast to bore more people if this is boring, right? But if your data tell you, hey, this is an exciting topic people are actually interested in, then absolutely let's do as many as people are interested. I am extremely excited to share this knowledge because I've acquired this knowledge as a scientist over the last 30 years of basically intensely researching this. And it's not really possible for someone to do that
Yes.
easily. And so I can share sort of the highlights.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So I would do our listeners a disservice if I don't go back to something I touched on about 10 minutes ago in our conversation. And that was when you talked about oral health, right? And the mouth. And in my head, I was like, there comes the light, an opportunity for an entrepreneur. From where you are
Yes.
at, give us an opportunity for an entrepreneur so that they can start looking at how do I solve not just my world, but the world around me.
Okay, but how does this relate to oral microbiome? Specifically, what are business opportunities with oral microbiome?
Absolutely.
Oh, I see. Well, I'll tell you what we've been doing at Viome. We have the most advanced oral microbiome test in the world. We have developed a test that detects oral cancer and throat cancer that is the most accurate test in the world, and it's commercially available both direct to consumer and to providers. We have developed two supplement products for oral microbiome, and they're both very unique on the market. No one else has them. One is oral lozenges. These lozenges are basically like vitamins and minerals and supplements for your oral microbiome. So they're like little lozenges that you dissolve in your mouth, and they have supplements, prebiotics, probiotics, all just for you. They're personalized, right? And so you dissolve those and you nourish your oral microbiome. Last but not least, we have a personalized toothpaste, and this is amazing. So when a Viome customer orders this toothpaste, The morning toothpaste is the same for everyone, and that toothpaste has been shown in clinical trials to reduce the plaque. But the evening toothpaste has very important features. First, it's a toothpaste, so it actually scrubs your teeth. Second, it contains all these nourishing compounds such as vitamins, minerals, probiotics, postbiotics, prebiotics for you, just for your microbiome, not for someone else's. And last but not least, you actually swallow this toothpaste because it also is beneficial to your gut
It's
microbiome.
amazing for children.
And so these are yeah, so these exact and it's safe because it's fluoride free. So these are the current products we have, and we currently have on our in our timeline planned additional products to protect the oral microbiome. So there are many opportunities here. There is a product out there that I want to mention. So there's a bacterium called Streptococcus mutans, and that is the major bacterium that causes cavities. It basically eats sugar and produces acid that degrades our teeth. Okay? So there's a company that created that same bacterium, but they genetically modified it so that it outcompetes the natural bacterium, but it does not produce acid. And so, literally, they just introduce that bacterium into your mouth once and it takes over and it replaces the old bacterium, but it's unable to cause cavities. And so, in their clinical trials with just a few people, they show that these people no longer have cavities at all. So, it's like a one time treatment for life. And they're selling that treatment for
Oh
$40,000.
my goodness.
So, are there other opportunities where you can suppress Porphyromonas gingivalis and reduce the risk of Alzheimer's, reduce the risk of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease? Of course, there are. So, yeah, people who have the right training, like in biochemistry, physiology, PhDs, MDs, and so on, or they can be just business people who, recruit the right smart people. They can come up with ideas and get funding and execute on those ideas. We're literally just opening up a new world of understanding how deep the impact is of oral and gut microbiome and vaginal microbiome on our health, and how many opportunities there are for a business. We're just literally, we've entered a new galaxy and there are stars everywhere to explore.
Before we sign off, we're living in a data driven world. In my immediate environment, what data should I be looking for as an immigrant?
Well, that depends on the question you're trying to ask, but I would say the first and foremost, invest in your health and your family's health. So go read the scientific data, and ChatGPT now can interpret any scientific paper for you. So you can either ask ChatGPT to summarize a topic, or if you find a paper and the title is like, wow, this is interesting, but you start reading the paper and you're like, I have no idea what the paper says, this is too complicated, you can upload it into ChatGPT and tell it, hey, explain this to me to a normal person, right? So ChatGPT now has become the most powerful tool. Basically, knowledge is now unlimited and free, which for centuries it was only for the privileged, and now it's unlimited and free. And so that I would say that is the single most important step you can make in your life, is be curious about how food, nutrition, sleep, and Zen affect your life and your family's life, and how you should adjust to those. Second, go to do the actual things. Don't just read about it and tell people how excited you are about it. Implement those strategies into your daily life. Minimize the number of times you go out to eat and cook more food at home. Experiment, include your children. My son cooks like anyone, like any chef can, and he's only 21 because we've raised him cooking every single meal. We don't go out at all. Then make sure you get enough sleep. Like, if you don't get enough sleep, it does not matter if you do everything else in your life, you're not going to have a healthy aging. You will not. That's just not going to happen. And so when people say, but I like to stay up and do whatever, you cannot do that. You have to get your 8 hours of sleep. If you're not willing to do that, then that means you're not investing in yourself. Um, and then Zen is the last one, meaning don't have stressors in your life. Create an environment where you can have a Zen like life. So that's a self investment in you and your family that you can do today that all the resources are available for you. You don't need extra money. Like people say about how I'm going to cook food, it's more expensive. Absolutely not. That is a false statement that eating out is cheaper than cooking at home. That is a false statement. Whoever tells you that,
Yeah.
they are trying to sell you something. That is a false information. Cooking at home is far cheaper. No matter what you do, it's far cheaper. So those are the things you should do in the next month, and then bring up your children to follow the same thing. And then beyond that, you can say, okay, there's so much technology out there. There's so many tools that we can use today where we can solve problems that 20 years ago were not solvable. And I discussed one of them, which is to change the system of governance that I am not working on, but I'm working on solving the health problem. But there are many other societal problems like education and delivering of education, transportation, homelessness, all kinds of things. People, there are these big problems that people can go after, and they can find a way to monetize on them so that they're self-sustainable. And I would encourage people to do that, because one of the ways that I could have launched my platform, my technology platform, was as a nonprofit or a research institute, but we would have had to beg for money every single year and linearly grow, whereas as a business we can grow exponentially.
Yes.
And so that's the better way to do it. Go find a problem where you can monetize, and it'll scale, and you'll actually solve it much more rapidly than if you live off grants and donations.
Dr. Momchila Vuyisich, thank you so much, because you lived up to my expectation and more. Immigrants, we must say we are grateful for your time. This is where I believe in immigrants every every single day. We see the opportunities, but we must challenge ourselves to live beyond ourselves to be able to find the solutions for the societies we've migrated to. Government is not our solution. We, as entrepreneurs, must become the solution for the societies we live in. Momo, please tell our listeners where they can find you on social media.
They can find me on LinkedIn, just Momo Vuyisich. Yeah, that's it. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and anyone can connect with me there.
Perfect. He did not just beat chronic pain or challenge medical systems and build companies rooted in belief that healing starts within. He has changed society the way we see it. That's the power of immigrants when they apply their talents. You can find us on TikTok at the Immigrant Nation Podcast, and on Facebook at the Immigrant Nation Podcast, and on LinkedIn and YouTube, the Immigrant Nation Podcast. Momo, please promise us you are coming back, because we need you for part two.
As long as I am useful to the audience, I will come back.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you. This has been amazing. I feel
Thank you, Martin, for
energized,
hosting.
and
And
there's so much more to be done. I appreciate you. Sir, let's connect soon. Thank you so much.